right, champions, let's take a whirl around paper 2, topic 10, authoritarian states, previously single party states. This is our review. Notice I have labeled the regions here for you on the maps because sometimes the questions will ask you to write about key leaders, each from a different region. So in terms of the people and places we've studied, obviously Castro is great because he's always going to be an opposite region from the other leaders. So you can always compare and contrast the Americas versus Stalin, who for particular cases here is going to technically be Europe, Mao in Asia, and Nasser, who though continentally on Africa is going to be the Middle East. You can compare and contrast Mao and Stalin. That is very often a strong pick. However, for my HOA friends, you might want to keep Castro in mind since you can write about him on paper 3 as well. I shouldn't even have to say the words, but I'm going to say the words anyway. US presidents are not single party state leaders. Psst, just saying. In terms of goals for preparing for paper 3, topic 10, you need to know at least 2 authoritarian state leaders because they're usually going to ask you to compare and contrast. You should probably know at least 2 key dates and 2 key policies, though I would prefer that you knew 2 key foreign policies and 2 key domestic policies. And then 2 either schools of historiography or historians or lenses, depending on the key person and the topic. Remember the structure and timing of paper 2. You're writing 2 paper 2s. The first one is going to be paper 2, topic 10, authoritarian states. The second one is going to be paper 2, topic 12, Cold War. For each of them, you're going to need an introduction short, which should include historical context and an argumentative thesis. You need 3 meaty body paragraphs in which you are comparing and contrasting both leaders in each. You need to pick key points of comparison and or contrast. It needs to be rich with facts, examples, and details, and I would love it if you brought in some historiography. If you have time for a conclusion, write a conclusion. If not, restate your thesis statement, AP World style. This is what your paper 2 is going to look like. It is going to remind you that each question is worth 15 marks. Nowhere on this is it going to tell you that you are writing topic 10 and topic 12. You have to know that. Your proctors will not know that information, and you cannot look over and ask somebody else. You have an hour and a half to write 2 essays, which gives you just enough time to do some pre-writing, some writing, and then maybe even some revising, just putting it out there. Watch out for key conjunctions like either or and. And if something is pluralized, ends in an S, they want you to write more than one example. You can always use a compare and contrast thesis for this. If you want to memorize the template before you go in, you're more than welcome to. Remember, our key points that we're going to be studying are emergence of authoritarian states, consolidation and maintenance of power, and aims and results of policies. They break down each of these subtopics, and the wording that is used here is going to be the wording that appears in your question. So conditions and methods are very often used as terms in the emergence questions. It depends on if they pick economic, social, or political factors. If they mention 1 or 2, you're more than welcome to mention the others. I caution you against the ideology question unless you have a strong foundation in the ideologies of each of these leaders and how they deviated from the prescribed ideologies. Legal methods is often a question in consolidation. Sometimes they've asked about leadership. You can always bring in propaganda. Nature, extent, and treatment of opposition is something that you should be prepared to answer. And successes or failures of policies is something that you would bring in consolidation or aims and results. There's always the possibility for a women and minorities question. There's always a possibility that you're going to be examining the extent to which this control was achieved economically, politically, or socially. Remember, there's always a foreign policy component to what these leaders are doing as well. Here are the previous questions that have been asked by IB. To answer these, you should know 2 leaders, especially more than 2 dates, and especially more than 2 policies. Notice that they are asking you to discuss with reference to 2 authoritarian states. This one is an each chosen from a different region question. We need to be prepared for these questions. I've gone through here and I've highlighted what overlaps with your prescribed topics and how they make these questions using the very same wording. Here are your IB command terms that you're most often likely to see on these exams. Remember, if you're asked singularly compare or singularly contrast, they really mean compare contrast. Analyze, evaluate, discuss. These are the terms that come up most often. However, there might be variations on these themes. Don't just answer the question from one stance or one side. Yes, they want you to make a stand and make an argument, but it's also helpful if you counter or challenge the question or propose alternatives. Again, you're going to be comparing and contrasting for most of these. You actually have to directly compare contrast based on key points. Writing one paragraph about one leader, one paragraph about the other, and then one paragraph of compare contrast will only get you one paragraph that can be assessed for compare contrast. This is what it's going to look like when you open up your packet, and you have to ignore all of the other topics other than the two that we studied. So authoritarian states, topic 10, then you're going to flip the packet over and you're going to ignore topic 11, causes, practices, and effects of war, and you're going to answer a question for topic 12. So one for topic 10, one for topic 12. Sometimes they will present you questions in the forms of quotes. Sometimes they will not have quotes. You are more than welcome to counter or disagree with the question. Specifically this one, the conditions in which authoritarian states emerged were mainly determined by economic factors. You can disagree and that their emergence was caused by other factors, political or social factors. But then you also have to bring in the economic component in order to gain credit. In this question, compare and contrast the methods used to maintain power in two authoritarian states, each from a different region. You want to make sure that you hone in on the methods and the maintenance. If you write a rise to power essay, that's not going to get you any credit. If you just write biographies of these leaders, that's not going to get you any credit. You have to pick three factors or three methods, and then how each leader used or did not effectively use those methods. Maybe consider sort of a change over time, methods they used in the beginning, methods they used in the middle, methods they used at the end. Or you can consider the extent to which those methods were successful. Here I've just given you an example of the questions that have been asked with quotes. You don't want to echo the question or restate the question. You don't want to put the quote in your question. But I've sort of given you a rundown of how you would break down these questions. For example, the use of force was the most important method used to maintain power in authoritarian states, discussed with reference to two authoritarian states. Most important or just a contributing factor, you could argue either. Did the use of force change over time? Did they start with force and gradually apply it? Was force the only method of maintenance in both regimes? In one more than the other, perhaps? So there's different ways that you can break down and examine these questions. Over here, we have the compare contrast questions and then evaluate questions. Really focus in on what they're asking you. Methods, propaganda, impact of policies, but specifically on women. And then compare contrast using those components. In an evaluate question, you're being asked to assess the implications and limitations, to make judgments about the ideas, works, solutions, or methods in relation to a selected criteria. So, for example, the impact of foreign policy on the maintenance of power. You want to address foreign policies as opposed to domestic and link directly to maintenance of power. These would be World War II or Cold War era questions. So just to reiterate, for authoritarian states, topic 10, you want to know at least one leader from each region, ideally, or two leaders total, but three would be safer. You want to know information about their rise to power, their consolidation and maintenance of power, the aims and results of their policies. You want key dates, you want historiography. You have all this information. Go back to your unit organizer packets and all this information is here for you. You have beautiful timelines that we've worked on in class. You have examples of key people. So, for example, say if I was writing a question where I was using a leader from the Soviet Union, I would probably pick Stalin as opposed to Lenin, because Lenin dies before he can even reverse the NEP, whereas Stalin is going to be in power from 24 to 53, and it gives you a little more meat to write about. And in writing about Joseph Stalin's rise to power, you're also writing about Lenin, and you're also bringing in information about Trotsky. We've done all sorts of material on Stalin. You have all this information, including historiography. You have all this material on Mao. You have multiple timelines. You have key figures. You want to know your acronyms here: Communist Party of China, People's Liberation Army. PRC is the state, so it's the party, the army, and then the state. We've done timelines on Mao. You have all sorts of information that can help you out. For my paper 3 HOA people, you want to make sure you're paying attention to Castro, because you can use Castro several times in paper 3 as well as paper 2. Castro can be used in authoritarian states for paper 2 as well as Cold War in paper 2. We have lots of information on Castro. Remember when we sorted Castro out by how he was categorized using those obituaries? You have all of those class notes at your disposal. Remember, Sebastian Balfour said that the demonization of canonization of Castro has left little room in between for an assessment. You have your paper 2 mark bands if you choose to go over them. I think this one that was highlighted by a student makes the most sense. In order to get to the 13 to 15 mark band, you need to be clearly focused, be aware of the demands and implications of the question, have a well-structured essay. It should be accurate and relevant and include historical context. It should have appropriate and relevant details that you support with analysis and evaluation. That analysis should be critical. You should evaluate different perspectives, which is code for historiography, and it should end with a reasoned conclusion. Let's see. This is sort of a mark scheme that was created by another teacher that I find interesting in terms of approach to question, knowledge, and analysis. If this helps you figure out what you need to add, by all means use it. In terms of historiography, can't go wrong with your Soviet Orthodox versus Western liberal. That's going to be your classic clash. You want to bring in some idea of revisionism or post-revisionism. Remember that access to the archives is a significant detriment, where we can't get that information from the PRC in Cuba because they still exist in their current form. That ideology question is always difficult, but if you feel comfortable with these, go for it. You can bring in propaganda information, censorship information. You have this chart, use it, look at it. I have a little more specific historiography for each region. Remember that you can bring in their news sources: Pravda, People's Daily, Grama. If Cold War historiography really messes with your head, you can bring in some of these Cold War theories that you can also apply. And remember, when we're making our paper 2 essays, think of it as building an ice cream sundae. That dish or structure that you have is your intro, your 3 body paragraphs, and your conclusion. You want to fill it with knowledge, accurate information, aware of the demands of the question and the implications. You want historical context and concepts and examples and links and comparisons and contrasts. And then all the fun stuff on the top would be evaluation and analysis, different perspectives, schools of historiography, and then the cherry on top is the specific names of historians, their perspectives, quotes, facts, examples, or details. You want to have a strong thesis and a strong argument with higher level vocabulary, and I know you can do this.